Happy Friday afternoon. It is December 19th at 1:31. We'll call the meeting to order. I know that we properly warned this meeting. I'm not clear that we necessarily got all of the agenda items published in time, so I just want to check with Lindsay, Chris, or anyone else. Do we need to make any amendments to the agenda as we have it before us today?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so with that said, are there any additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, generally speaking? Hearing none, is there a motion to, actually, I guess we don't have to approve the agenda. We need to have a discussion and approval of meeting dates and times. So I guess this is really just floating out. When is a good time for us to start meeting? Chris, can you give us a layout of what the Administrative Rules, Administrative Procedures Act timelines are, the LCAR, ICAR submission timelines, if you know them? I did not talk to you about this beforehand, so I don't want to put you on the spot if we're not ready for that.
I don't know them off the top of my head. I've been speaking with Lindsay about this. I don't think that there is any specific deadline. Like, it has to be in by March 31st or anything like that I'm aware of. I will say they do have a meeting schedule, so we'd have to meet it within that schedule. I just don't know what it is.
From my experience, it's rolling, so it's more a question of like when the council would like to have rules start the process, and then depending on the dates for everything, like you can kind of plan on 3 months, 3 to 4 months from start to finish, just by the time you line up with all the committee dates. So depending on when you want it all approved, you can work backwards from there.
So with that understanding, I will submit the item of awareness that I've been given, which is every time we submit new rules, changes to the whole thing, we pay $2,000. So to get everything done is ideal for the sake of cost efficiency. With that said, Mr. Chair, Mr. Director, do you have any marching orders for us for when you want all of this done? With any degree, understanding some of these things are responses to audit items. Some of them are critical operational issues. Some of them are, we never thought of that items.
I don't have any specific marching orders. I would just like to make sure that we are comprehensive in our review and look at what it is that we want changed, and then be cognizant of things that are related to statutory requirements, that there may be agencies outside of us that are looking for modifications that would then impact the rule that we might be working on. So I don't know if I have a specific time frame, but I think the sooner we can start working on them and identifying them, the better, and just trying to get as much as we can crammed into that whole process.
Yeah, I'd agree. As many as possible.
If I were to float an arbitrary random date of having all of this work accomplished by, say, September, is that within or far outside of your expectations?
I'd say personally, for me, that's a little bit beyond. I'd be looking to see if we could have this closer to like maybe May or June. Thinking that the legislative season would be getting close to a close, and that we would have an idea of where there might be problems or not, and then give us time to, get that done before the end of the year.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, it would seem, Kim, you could probably comment on this, because I know that we had one of those legislative review, or the rules reviews. It would seem, if what Chris mentioned, if the changes were to be accomplished in the first half of the year, essentially by a year from now, they should be implementable. Does that sound like a timeline? I was recalling how long it took the last time.
Yes,
It's
I
the
think
ALR
if,
and the ILR, right? It's actually a bifurcated it's a two process review.
yes, I think along with what Chris said, if sort of the working list that we roughly have, if we're gonna get through, not only through our committee, but then to the council to agree to the rule by June, and then by June, we would know if the legislature had any other rules that they wanted added on to anything. Who knows, right? You had some surprise ones last session that you
Yes,
didn't know
we
were
did.
coming your way. Luckily didn't have a deadline attached to it, so that's good. That would make sense that then we could, any new ones, quickly deal with those in the summertime with the objective that Chris Burkett and company has the laundry list all ready to go to start the process in September. 'Cause then you would potentially be done by the new year if all the dates line up. Or right into January. Yeah, like if everything goes right, 3 months, but something always gets returned or needs to be whatever and very finicky. So, or you just like miss a meeting date and then your whole timeline's like backed up 3 weeks because of the various committees. But I think, yeah, if we had our list of things to do and we got them through our committee to the council by June, that would put us in a good place to just file once, which I think is what everyone's talking about to do. There is also an option if we ever need it, you can have an emergency rule filed, and I haven't done that, but it's a quicker process if you ever need an emergency rule. So just have that in your back burner if we ever feel that's needed. But if we do just want to do one filing, I think that timeline makes sense.
Kim, do you know if there's the same kind of fee for filing on an emergency rule as for just a regular rule change?
That I don't know, because I haven't done it. I do know there's a few departments who look like they file emergency rules like every other day, so I'd be surprised if it was at $2,000, but I don't know. And the fee I've been told is because of having to post it into all the various publications. So I don't know if the emergency rule has like a different standard. So that would be a question to ask.
If only we had something like the Federal Register where we published everything to one place.
Yeah.
Anyways, so
That'd be
in light
nice.
of all of that discussion, we have a variety of things. Right now, I'm counting 3, 6, 7, 8. Well, I guess technically 7 discussion items that we have. This is before we even really get into anything else the committee has, but this has been a growing list that we built over time. I anticipate there are more things we need to touch, but we just haven't identified them yet. And one of those things is addressing what to do around 5 policies, some already drafted, some that need to be drafted based on previous legislative directives. We got a lot of work, and to get this accomplished by May, and also during the legislative session, which I know all of you are involved in the legislative process in some way, shape, or form to some degree. How frequently do we want to meet? What days are good to meet?
I just offer, I think we should start out meeting probably more frequently than we might otherwise think, and that way we run in, it's better to undo than to try and get things on the schedule.
So let's start with weekly for discussion purposes, and then if we go with weekly, is Monday, the day that the legislature is not open, but then everybody crams everything around trying to get ready for the legislative week. Is Monday better, or is during the legislative session, which might cost us members who then get called with short or no notice to legislative testimony? Is there a preference for anyone?
I think if you make this, Yeah, yes, Mondays tend to fill up, but right now they haven't gotten too bad for me at least. So, I mean, I would prefer Mondays, but that's just me.
I would prefer Monday afternoons potentially, or if we have to go to another day of the week, that it's during the lunch hour.
Mondays are fine with me as long as it doesn't interfere with the morning legislative update.
Right.
Which we'll all be at anyway, so.
Yeah.
We could pull a DPS and say 5 minutes after the Monday legislative meeting.
I don't love that idea.
Okay.
It's a little too big.
To recover.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kim, you did say the afternoons, right?
The only thing I'll mention, folks, is that Mondays are when our state likes to set its holidays, and we have two of them in rapid succession. The 19th,
Mhm.
we have MLK Day. The 16th of February, we have President's Day. So it's not that we necessarily need those days, but just something to keep in mind.
So given that we're meeting 1:30 today and we have a full committee, would 1:30 on Mondays generally work for people? And then we can either cancel for holidays or adjust on those weeks where we have holidays?
I wouldn't need it to be 2. Sorry, if we're doing Mondays, because I have a standing 1 to 2.
All right, 2:00 on Mondays each week until otherwise changed.
I can do that.
I see head nods across the board. Thumbs up, thumbs up.
Yes, Mark, the only on January, so yes, generally 2 p.m. Mondays is great for me. January the 5th, we have the kind of meet the legislative committee folks. So I will be unavailable for that meeting, but otherwise available. So we should schedule that, but I just won't be available for that one.
So I am looking for a motion that we meet each week on Mondays at 2:00. And whether we want to meet on the 5th or start meeting on the 12th, I'll leave to the motion maker's judgment.
I'll make a motion that we start the meetings on Monday at 2:00, starting on January 12th.
Is there a second? Moved and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye or raise
Aye.
a hand. Any opposed? The ayes have it. We will be meeting Mondays, 2:00, starting January 12th. And we'll deal with cancellations, I think, by chair's prerogative. So I'll just cancel meetings based on the whim. How's
The
that?
whim and the federal holiday schedule.
And if there's a need for us to meet, I mean, we can call a special meeting and I'll work with academy staff to properly warn those. But generally my inclination will be we cancel unless there's a clear objective to have the meeting. But just for transparency's sake, we'll say that. All right. Next up, the nomination and approval of the committee chair and vice chair. So just for the sake of the conversation, the way I became the acting chair, and I emphasize acting, prior committee members of this committee stopped participating for a variety of reasons or passed away. And I think I'm the last stand of the original Rules Committee, which I'm honored to hold the title. But it just became a recognition of the importance of the need for the committee to carry its work forward for obvious reasons. So we now have a full committee. Also grateful for that. The prior committee chairs have been attorneys, which not because of the fact that they were attorneys, they were the chair. It just happened to be that. And it was incredibly helpful to convert the old rules from 2018 to the new rules, the ones that we have now. Evan Meenan started the work. He did a tremendous job, but it was a lot of work. Cassie Birdyshaw picked up the torch from Evan when he got a new position, continued the work until she left state employ. I am not an attorney. I don't know that there's any expectation that it be an attorney. I don't think it matters. But that said, I will note my predecessors had that credential. Because we have a pretty solid set of rules now and they work, and we also have legal counsel, i.e. Chris Burkett, I don't think that there's a requirement or criteria, but I will call it out. I am happy to continue as a chair if you will have me. If there are other
Make a
people,
motion
I
for
will
Mark
not
as
be
chair.
offended. I'm not done, Colonel. I will
late.
not be offended if anybody else wants to be nominated and carry the torch forward. I have plenty to do. Colonel, do
I
you
restate
have
my
a
motion.
I didn't hear it. It was out of order. Lindsay, can we
second.
kick him? All right, so a nomination is on the floor from Colonel Stedman, with a second from Chief Hall. Are there any other nominations? I'm gonna wait. All right, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Everyone under duress, please indicate with two blinks of your eyes. I will abstain. Moving on to a vice chair. Seeking a nomination for a vice chair. I do intend to be at these, but the catch would be if I get called away to legislative testimony, which I do expect to happen. So I would want someone who was able to step in. I'll work with you, but generally I will help facilitate making sure an agenda is published or communicate with you otherwise.
I nominate Justin Stedman.
I second that.
Justin, do you want to make any nominations?
I was gonna say, I nominate Kim McManus and Pete. No.
Too late.
Oh, yeah,
Justin, do you accept the nomination?
I will accept the nomination.
Are there any other nominations? All right, all in favor of Justin Stedman as the vice chair, please say aye. Raise your
Aye.
hand. Opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? All right. Thank you for your service, Justin. I'm sure we will do a tremendous job of screwing up invitations going
Yes,
forward.
we will. Yes, we will.
All right, next up, so I've listed this as the non-existent rules discussion. Over the last, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, I've been working with Chris Burkett, Lindsay Thaverge, Director Burkell. Ken, I'm not sure if we've had the pleasure of talking about rules yet, but we'll start if we haven't. So we've just been building this out. I apologize if any of my headings make no sense, simply because this was a quick note-taking form that turned into a copy and paste into an agenda. There is no action item suggested under any of these. I wanted to pull them apart for the purpose of today, talk about what the issues are so that the committee members can go to their relevant constituencies, any stakeholders you may identify as a committee member, and say, who do we need to talk to as we pick this torch up starting January. Without further ado, we will go to that. This will be kind of an informal discussion session because we have the full administration of the academy here. We have our legal counsel. Some of these I threw on at my own whim. If there's other things that you think should be added, that's why this is a non-exhaustive list. I also just got my lunch and haven't eaten yet, so I'm hoping somebody else can speak a lot so I can at least get a couple bites. Chris Burkett, can I turn at least the agency policy non-compliance discussion over to you for discussion?
Absolutely. Happy to take over, Sheriff.
Thank
So,
you.
I'll try not to be overly verbose, although I do want to let Mark eat his sandwich. So maybe I'll talk slow. The reality is that there is a statute, 20 VSA 2359, that makes council services contingency on agency compliance with all model rules, and that we are supposed to have adopted procedures. In our first audit and in our subsequent follow-up audit, it was noted that we do not have any such policies or procedures in place. We looked at the idea of a procedure versus a rule, and it's my feeling, and I think thus far everybody's in agreement, that a rule makes more sense because a rule has essentially the more enforcement power. It has greater teeth than a simple policy would have. And so in that vein, I've drafted a policy which I'm happy to share around. Yeah. That essentially describes that, the obligation by law enforcement agencies, and at the same time, what will happen to their agency if they're found in non-compliance. And it's similar to what we do with other things, in that we provide them with the notice, we provide them with an opportunity to get in compliance before we take any action. We also give them an opportunity to be heard by the council about non-compliance before we take any action. We even allow, because the statute allows for it, them to enter into written agreements to to sort of avoid suspension of services for a reasonable set period of time, so that they can work with VPA to get back in compliance. So it's designed to give everybody fair notice. If they're out of compliance, it gives them an opportunity to make agreements to get in compliance. And it also gives them some due process rights if they're not in compliance, to bring it to the council's attention, and the council can determine what to do. And I can share that around via email. I can put it up on the screen now. I don't know which people want to do. I'm assuming probably shoot it around through email so people can parse it at their leisure, since we're not taking any action today.
Chris, I don't want to interrupt, but
Sure.
Based on sort of just listening to the words and sort of the plurality of some of it, are there a number of agencies that are out of compliance with some of these, or?
I don't know that there are any agencies that are out of compliance necessarily. It's what we're doing is we're simply creating a rule so that if we find an agency that out of compliance,
that makes me feel. I was getting nervous. That's all I was like.
No. Let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say that we have Utopia, Vermont, and Utopia, Vermont has a fair and impartial policing policy that is out of compliance with our model rule. And we've worked with them, we've tried to work with them, and they've indicated that they're simply not going to comply with the model rule. This would be the policy that we would, or the rule that we would follow to, one, notify them that they're out of compliance and they have to get in compliance or we'll suspend them. And also gives them rights to come in and kind of explain why it is that we should not suspend them despite the statute.
So it provides teeth,
Yeah.
but it also provides opportunity.
Yeah, the entire thrust of the VPA is that we work with you first before we whack you on the hand. But the statute's fairly clear. We're supposed to be whacking on the hand if people don't do it. Our thought is that we whack on the hand when people say either we're not going to do it, so it's intentional, or they basically screw around long enough and we have to kind of give them a boot to the hindquarters.
Yeah.
Chris, quick question on that.
Yes, Chair.
Is there an avenue for any full council decision on that? Is that like an appellate level?
Yes.
From the executive director to the full council?
So the way I've drafted the rule for as a proposed rule is that initially it would be an executive director decision. However, that the agency can review that decision to suspend under the rule. It would be an appeal under Rule 9 of our current rules.
Okay. Thank you.
So yes, they would have some due process rights.
So a couple things, and maybe in reverse order. Chris Burkell, director, how do you feel about telling an agency, and I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't feel like answering this right now or want to think about it. How do you feel about saying to an agency, we're cutting you off, and then they have a choice of appealing that versus saying, I'd prefer the council tell an agency they're getting cut off. It's not a personal thing because the academy does have a relationship to help, to lend the hand, to support, to enable doing the right thing. But when it is misconduct, how do you feel in your position of doing that? And how do you feel that would be for future directors if it weren't yourself? Do you feel that that's a reasonable balance?
Yeah, I do. I think the guidance would be helpful because as it is now, we always reach out to an agency that's non-compliant for whatever they're non-compliant for and try to get cooperation. And we do that sometimes multiple times. And at some point, whether it's, let me say this, in the experience that I've had, it's never been an agency that has been intentionally defiant. It's been a lack of you name it, resources, ability, understanding of what their responsibility is. But at some point, having that structure would be helpful to say, as the executive director, I've reached out, done this, that, and the other thing, and now I'm moving to this final step. So, and it also gives, us some clarity, and it coincides with the auditor's report of us not taking action that the legislature wanted us to take when agencies were what I believe to be intentionally non-compliant.
And then, do you think it makes sense if it were, say, this could be either or options to it? You have administrative authority to do it, but doesn't necessarily have to be administrative authority. The council has the authority to do it, but could depend on the director and could also take it up as an option. Or would you want to recommend it to a committee? It could be the rules committee, the professional regulation committee, the Mickey Mouse committee. I don't know what the committee would be, but say I want this final determination to be made by a group of people, which then could be appealed to the council. Do you have any direction how you would want that to go?
Yeah, I think that just adds a never-ending layer to something that then never gets resolved and gives us additional work. And I think it should be a relationship between the executive director and the agency to try to get them compliant. Again, I not just me and the staff here now, but I think any future executive director would hold that same process. And then when it gets to the point where they're non-compliant and they have to be cut off from services, that would still be with essentially the stay of execution, where they can appeal it to the full council and then have the council weigh in on whether or not the director has taken enough steps to ensure that they do that. Because the end result is that even if, let's say I have to hold an agency accountable to the fact that they are non-compliant and they want to appeal that decision to the council, essentially it means for that brief period of time until they've had a hearing before the council, they can't use the services of the academy. That's not going to be that critical unless it's something like at a very end of the year when somebody's trying to do their rule submissions on things that they haven't done. Well, then maybe they should have thought of that process a little bit sooner, but there's got to be some accountability on law enforcement end as well.
Kim?
I appreciate where Mark's brain is going with those questions. And Chris Burkett, definitely, I think after this meeting, emailing around what you've drafted will be really helpful to see that pathway between the executive director and the council. Because to Mark's point, like, we always want to be writing these rules without thinking about us individuals and like how we would be acting, right? We want to think about how the structure, the organism would be acting. And so in that, and I prefer the executive director making these calls and then it going up to the council just from an efficiency standpoint. But I think we would want in the rules probably some time limits for an agency to come into compliance or some sort of parameters. Again, thinking forward, we don't know who future executive director is and whether they're too lenient or too, throwing the hammer down too soon. So taking out us individuals and being able to look at how this process is set up will be really helpful. So when we're able to read it, Chris, I think that would be great for everybody on the committee to have in mind of just thinking of it structurally, this back and forth of who's making the decision when. And then, like you said, Chris Burkett, we have a lot of this set up in our other rules of like when we bring it up to the council, so it'll probably mirror that. But it'll be helpful to be able to read it and see that.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that we do put in there is that there can be a written agreement between an agency and the executive director to waive suspension of services for a set period of time, but we put a deadline in it, 6 months, with the idea that that is, yeah, if they can't get within policy in 6 months, there's a problem. So yeah, kind of wanting to put reasonable modifications in, but also wanting to put some hard deadlines in of things that they have to hit. But I'll send it around so that people can see what it is. I would encourage you to look at sections E, F, and G, because those are the ones that really are speaking to the issues that we're talking about.
Great. Any other questions just in the broad strokes of rule related to agency noncompliance and the direction that will follow? Hearing none. So there are a number of policies that this requires. This process that we're just talking about would require an agency to adopt, maintain, do the things with. I'm going to list those policies real quick. I don't think we need to talk about at least 3 of them. We might have to talk about 1 and maybe 2 because I just don't know the statutory reference off the top of my head. But 3 of the policies are conductive electrical weapons policy. If you have tasers, you have to have this policy. One of them is fair and impartial policing, which the council has its own committee on. They just passed a review. It was not an update to the policy, but rather a review, which was submitted to the council, and I believe the council voted to accept that review, but I forget if we passed it or if that's an action step for a future meeting. And then we have body-worn camera policy, which if you have body-worn cameras, you have to adhere to that policy. So those are 3 of the policies we were talking about that would be subject to this. Any questions to talk about any of those 3, or can we breeze over them for the sake of time? Kim?
Sorry, were you saying use of force or fair and impartial policing?
I said fair and
Right.
impartial policing. I realize I don't have use of force included on here, but that would also be on the list.
I can't remember, is it like use of force, does that have the same? I think so, right?
Yeah, so
Statewide
there's an
mandate.
interesting construct of model policies and mandatory policies that exist within the council's purview or the academy's purview, depending on which statute you read, but we're kind of treating as the nebulous one and the same.
I thought use of force was mandated. I may be
It is.
wrong. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, there's not a statewide model use of force policy. There's a statewide use of force policy. However, there is a
Right.
model policy on, I believe it's fair and impartial policing, which is considered to be the floor. So
Right.
you can have a more restrictive fair and impartial policing policy, but it doesn't have to be that policy. And then CEWs, I don't know, body-worn cameras, I don't recall. I think you could be more restrictive.
I think
So,
those are
like,
all
it-
model, yeah.
But it's just like we have this strange framework of what things are, but they're also required, but not necessarily required in full form. Just the minimum standards are required.
We're required by 2 separate agencies doing different things.
It's all
Yeah.
really straightforward.
Which, if we can even craft out how to solidify that framework, I think a lot of it's just because there's nothing that exists. And if we could explain to the legislature the difference through the ICAR, LCAR process, like a model policy is helping someone draft with best practices codified. A mandatory policy is you shall. Maybe there's a 3rd or 4th flavor of what this framework of policies could be. Maybe we could even codify that into our rule process to say, which one are you selecting from, legislature? Can you help us understand? All right, so hearing nothing further on those 3 policies that I believe we maintain. The next one is sealed histories. This was a legislative requirement that was mandated after some give and take on expungements of criminal records and a push by a variety of stakeholders to stop having expunged criminal records, especially when there was government action, where it came to rest after, I believe it was a conference committee. Though others here were part of that process or processes. require the council to adopt a policy on how law enforcement officers would use or not be allowed to use sealed histories. I suspect that this is going to be another document that needs to be circulated. I know that a draft is already in works. Is there anyone who desires to speak to this policy prior to people reviewing it?
Just, I'll let folks know that at this point, a draft has been circulated amongst a select number of police executives. I think, Mark, you were one of them, because I wanted to make sure sheriffs I had received a sheriff's perspective. I 3 chiefs, 1 of a city, 2 of small towns, also were included in that. And I've already started to get feedback, which has been very positive. So I'm hopeful that we'll have this policy revised, polished, and ready to go for the council in January or February at the latest.
Mr. Paquette, was one of those chiefs Sean Burke, who's the head of VACOP?
No,
Could we
But I
make
could-
it?
we can absolutely send it to him.
Thank you.
Can you? I can probably get his email address.
Chris, if it makes it easy, I can forward it to him and CC you on it, just so you have the chain.
That'd be beautiful if you could do that. Thank you, Sheriff.
Kim?
Yeah, just a note for our list of things to do that the sealed records legislation also requested that we make a few rules about this policy. So just on our list of things to do, I think it'll be pretty straightforward rule, but just an FYI.
And I appreciate that, because some of the problem with the way this list was developed is we had chicken egg problems. Like one thing points to the other thing, which points to the other thing. So I fear we're going to run into that. And at least a preference of mine, and if the committee has a opposition to this preference, please speak now. A preference of mine would be that we be efficient in referencing or cross-referencing existing rules we have. So we already talked about, like, hey, if someone wanted to appeal it, we can use existing rules on waivers to appeal something to the council. Let's not create a new rule that creates a new apparatus for how to appeal someone getting cut off. So anyway,
yeah, no, that's a good
I think
point.
that's efficient.
Yeah, as long as it, right, like when we're doing that cross-reference, right, as long as we're checking the box of what the legislature asked for the rule to be, so that when Chris argues it in front of Elcar, like, yes, this satisfies this. We'll just, yeah, in our list of things to do, have that.
And I hope, even though I know the cross-reference might require some degree of additional effort, it will actually be less effort overall for all involved. So.
Yeah. Than having to do one-offs all the time. Yeah, no, that's smart.
And then we end up in weird conversations like what's the applicable based on conflicting language. So ideally we reduce to get more if we can. Anyone have an oppositional statement to that? Cool. Not a vote, just guidance for our wonderful drafter, Attorney Chris Burkett. All right. I don't know if somebody can look up 20 VSA 2411, but that is also one of the policies that we apparently have to pay attention to. And I did not write enough notes to see that. So anyone who wants to
I just
speak
looked
to
it up.
Give me just a sec.
The council may adopt rules to implement the provisions of the subchapter. So basically it's just the statute that says we can
Make rules.
make rules.
Yeah.
So more just giving us, like, if we want rules in other areas, that's our catch-all.
anything else. Got it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
We'll get there.
We'll get there. All right. So next up, and certainly we can loop back to these if anyone has a brilliant thought, but again, we're just trying to get awareness so that we can go through these more in depth. Next up, we got the frequency of our rules review requirements. Currently, I believe rules require that we do this every year, every 2 years, which in theory requires us to resubmit it to LCAR, ICAR, which then in theory requires us to pay the fee, which is absurd if we change nothing. Based on how our rules are currently written, as we have interpreted it, I think.
Checking the rules right now.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Someone
Sorry,
said
missed the
something like
first
this
part.
to me.
Is this the tuition-based one where
No.
we vote
Oh.
on the tuition and
It
fees
might
each
be-
year?
It might be tied to the tuition, so the tuition and fees have to be approved each year. The fees are set in rule because the fees are set in rule if there's any change, or and we might have to annually do it based on our rule on Rule 11. So that becomes us having to update the rules every year. So then it raised the question, how often do we want to raise our rules? Thank you, Lindsay.
Ooh,
My thought being an annual review of rules is not a problem. Maybe a biannual review of rules, since that follows some of the other constructs of things that we also, as a council, are responsible for reviewing. And generally, our rules don't change that often. So to say, we looked at them and we don't see any areas for work, we phone in a review session and either make recommendations to the council to reopen our rules, or we say we're good and move on, but at least we keep a pulse on it. That's my opinion.
Did you say review has to go to ICAR and LCAR too, though, if we review them and don't do anything?
I think what Lindsay just said is because of the language in Rule 11, we have to go every year, because the rule itself says we will go every year. And that's one of the things we're going to clean up in our next conversation, is to say that's silly, that wasn't intended, that was just how it was written, but nobody really that had it as an intent. I don't think the LCAR or ICAR would have received it that way.
Okay.
But it's kind of what we wrote. So then it's saying, can we have a process approved by LCAR, ICAR to update our rules? I'm sorry, update our fees each year at a council vote, a hearing, or whatever that process needs to be. But it raised the question of how often should we review our rules?
Which currently we have to do every year for the fees.
Correct.
For fees, yes.
I just want to reread Rule 11.
Well, it's every time that we change our base
Um,
tuition rate under 20 VSA 2355, we have to do through formal rulemaking. So in
Right, so it's
theory,
basically, if we were to change every year,
yeah.
we'd have
So-
to go through that.
So I mean, every time that we look at our tuition and the base rate changes, if we're ever going to change it, it has to be done through LCAR.
Right. So it's only if there's a change.
Which also includes the entrance exam fee. Does it
I
include
think that's
food?
actually, for some reason, I think the entrance exam fee is set by statute.
It
Which-
is.
Yeah,
It is.
which vexes me. So there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah, and it
That-
says specifically in our rules that the entrance fee, those fees need not be adopted through formal rulemaking.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's yeah. So it's
Can't-
really section D of Rule 11 that is causing us so much heartache. That if we could delete that, we'd be ecstatic.
That, and then I guess it depends what we do going forward for statute. If we're going to ask for that change for the $30, then if we're going to go ahead and adjust the rule to account for that change, if it goes through.
Is that
Sure.
something you're asking for this year?
I will defer to Chris.
I think we need to, simply because we're covering the additional cost of what that fee is now, because it's set in statute, and I would almost prefer the statutory change be nebulous and not list a dollar amount, but
Right. No,
prefer
that,
the
yeah,
language
it
differently.
totally makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know what the legal language would be that would be the appropriate fee, or, something along those lines, but taking
Entrance-
a dollar amount out of statute for sure doesn't belong there.
I
Prevailing
always fear
competitive rate.
approaching that conversation because I've approached that conversation unrelated to council business and been specifically told fees are set by the legislature, period.
Mm.
It was like a hard stop for me, and I was like, okay, and that was many years ago, so things do change. But some things, I caution.
I mean, I don't know how comparable it is, but that's the issue we have every year is in order for us to adjust any of our permitting or license fees, it has to go through a fee bill through legislature. So there's probably some validity to that.
But I also pose the question of could the fee bill also be the bill that covers these things as opposed to our rules? Since we codify it in our rules, if
Yes.
Yeah.
the legislature changed it, do we have to go through the rulemaking process?
Yeah, that
And I
seems
feel this was
silly.
a belt and suspenders approach to say, we want, I remember specifically this conversation of the Rules Committee saying we want this to be as much of a guide for law enforcement as it is the rules of the council. But now understanding this nuance issue of it costs $2,000 to change these every time.
Mm-hmm.
As few
Okay,
times
maybe
as possible,
we have
yeah.
a helper document somewhere else that people can read when.
Yeah, or
So-
even editing this section to say fees are established by the legislature, see, and then note the statute for current fees. Go see over there. Yeah, so we would just have on that one, aside from needing to change the statute, but like in that statute, it doesn't say anything about needing this to be in our rules, right? Like we would just
don't.
have to make sure there's no requirement for it to be in our rules, and if there isn't, then we can edit that.
Let me just double check. I don't think it says anything that we need.
It has so the first one that we were talking about, so the tuition fees for any basic training or annual in-service training required under this section of this chapter shall be set forth in rules adopted by the council and shall reflect the actual cost for operation, blah, blah, blah. But the next one on tuition fees does not mention rules.
So, right, so if you all advocate for a statutory change there, you'd want to change that first section. If we want to take it out of here.
But without changing any fees in statute, really, this is just a contemplation of striking Rule 11 sub D, and that doesn't really have any effect. Is that your interpretation, Chris Burkett?
I would want to look at it a little bit closer, but yes, my knee-jerk reaction is if we could remove that and then play with the language that we've been discussing here, that would hopefully take care of the concern that we have that every time we want to change a tuition rate, we have to go through LCAR.
Mhm.
So if we can make that modification, and again, I'll talk. Lindsay has given me some good language modification that she has looked at that I can clean up. I don't even think I need to clean it up that much, but I can send around to. Lindsay's like, oh yes, you do.
Engaged.
Yes, ma'am. that I can send around to all of the subcommittee members so that you can see what it is that we're looking to do, and I can kind of put in a little blurb as to why I think it's the right thing to do. And then Kim can tell me I'm wrong.
So I think we'll put a pin in Rule 11 just for the sake of saying that's what we want to do, and food for thought when we come back on the 12th or whatever day that was in January, with whatever the agenda will be for that day's worth of work. But these are really the issues we're going to try to pull apart and say, was there anything, now that we've had some time to look at and see what we're talking about, is there issues that we are not foreseeing that are problematic? So with that, we kind of skipped sub B, which is the frequency of our rules review. Is there any preference that anyone has, at least initially, we could use as a starting point, which people could come back at our January meeting and say, that is awful for these reasons? Does 2 years seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think 2 years is
I
biannually
think
makes
2
sense.
years. Yeah.
Is
Yeah, and
academies-
written in the way that, but for any statutory, requirements, it needs to be adjusted, like that. Obviously, it's not a requirement that we wait 2 years, but that we will review every 2 years as a base.
Yeah, and I forget, I think at one point, Kim, maybe you remember, we had a severability clause in our rules.
Yes.
Do we still have that, or did it get stripped? I thought it got stripped.
I think that's,
That's Rule 1.
I was gonna say, I think it's right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, to the point of if the statute's updated, the statutes would prevail anyway. So at the end of the day, 2 years makes sense. I'll note in the code of conduct, I believe we said it was an annual review,
So,
which is in Rule 28.
Scope. Annual review. Code of conduct is reviewed annually by the Professional Regulations Subcommittee with any recommended changes presented to the full council. So,
right, that's for the code of conduct though, not for like the rule on the code of conduct.
Correct.
when did that rule go effective? Because obviously, if we're past the annual deadline, I want to bring that to the subcommittee chair's attention.
It was like mid-January that rule went into effect. And we had just
2025 or
Approved-
2024?
2025.
Okay.
2025, because the code of conduct went through the council fall of 2024,
Current rules effective February 2, 2025.
February 2. There we go. Yeah. So it's coming up on a year.
I'm gonna just make a mental note. I got to email Trevor and let him know that we need to, on one of our next subcommittee meetings, do a review.
All right,
Year
so
moves fast.
we'll at least start with a biannual review. And again, check with your people, whoever your people are. If you feel it should be more, less, something else. That's the intent of our next conversation. I'm going to skip over sub C for a minute. That's the PT test. We'll go to Rule 14, rule waiver versus training waivers for entry into out of state or out of jurisdiction programs, OOJ programs. Lindsay, do you want to take this, or is somebody else prepared to speak to it?
Sorry, this was on the PT one?
No,
Yeah.
we're talking about out of jurisdiction waivers
Oh.
and Rule 14.
Oh, is this because the way it's written, so the rule actually talks about training waivers, the 60-day, which is in statute, but it doesn't really outline anything rule related for OOJ? Is that what you're referring to?
It definitely rings a bell. I'm not sure if it's the bell that made it on this list because we built this over 6 months. So that is one issue. We have people who are subjected to entry standards like a PT test.
And a
Who,
written
if they're
exam,
coming
too.
from an out of jurisdiction waiver, they already have a certification. Do we need to have Chief Smith from the Air
yeah.
Force Office of Special Investigations come to Vermont, do a PT
Yeah.
test to enter the out of jurisdiction waiver? This is one issue.
Yeah.
I think most people would say, no, that's kind of silly, but this kind of comes into, so we probably haven't shared this. With the Administrative Procedures Act, and I turn to the attorneys in the room to tell me I'm wrong on everything. With the Administrative Procedures Act, we can have a rule that is designed for waiving rules, with the understanding that if we're waiving rules as a standard practice, we should just build a rule. So if we waive this for every agency head coming to Vermont with an out of jurisdiction thing, we should just make our rules say the thing as opposed to submit a waiver every single time, which is good practice. I mean, it makes sense. It's transparent and whatever. And they also the legislature does not want the waiver system be used to do an end run around the rules process. Like, they want the rules to stand as rules, and to waive everything would also make them ineffective. So logically it makes sense, but out of jurisdiction candidates would be subject to all the things, and it does not seem consistent with what we want, especially when some of these entry requirements are designed for can they complete basic training, and they're not going to do basic training. But then what are the rules? Do they need an entrance test? Do they need a diploma? Do they need a medical exam, a physical, a background check, and a character check? Like, what are the things, and how do we check it? It's an odd problem.
And hopefully some of this, we're in conversation between waiver and TAC, will be outlined a bit to have a recommendation on that.
I mean, I would
So-
think some of it would be relevant and some of it isn't. I mean, I don't speak for every town in Vermont because I know there are some that probably do a pretty questionable background that Director Burkell is probably experienced, but for the most part, I would think that most responsible communities would have done. I mean, we would do a complete background on a chief candidate like we would any other law enforcement hire. I don't know if others do, but that there may be a reason for that to stay within the rules.
Yeah, and so then a question becomes, is Rule 14 for entry standards for basic training or entry standards to the law enforcement profession? And so a possible direction, and I think, as Lindsay said, we're waiting for recommendations from the waiver committee who fundamentally handles these issues, and the TAC committee who fundamentally handles the curriculum stuff. They've identified and flagged this as something that they think that they can provide insight, guidance, and or recommendations on, but I don't want to speak for either committee. Do we have a rule 14.1, which is entry standards for basic training, and a rule 14, which is entry standards for Vermont law enforcement certification? We might say all law enforcement officers need to have a polygraph. And then in entry standards, you also have to pass the PT test because you need that for the academy. So I don't really see us needing to spend too much time on this one, except to say we're waiting for feedback and recommendations from the subcommittees from the council. Lindsay?
One other thing I just wanted to bring up on that was F3 and 4. Just process-wise, if there's any way to add clarity when we adjust the rule on that of who actually makes that determination. That was a conversation we had.
Noted. Any questions or thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Only one thought, just for process as we move forward. For Chris Burkett, I imagine you're going to be our scribe for all things, I hope. So as these
More than happy to delegate. So, Kim, in all of your copious spare time while the legislature's meeting, I'm happy to.
I feel like you've got this. But for my brain, these conversations get so tricky for me when I don't see them like in our current rules. So like as these questions and comments come up, if we're able to put them in a working, document of the draft of our rules, and like we know we're kind of checking them off as we go along. Just moving like for our January 12th meeting, like whatever we decide to like chunk off for that meeting, if we're like working within the rules document, that would be helpful.
So I'm clear as to what you're proposing. Are you saying that what works best for you as you're reviewing something is to basically give you like a markup as they do in the legislature of the current rule with the proposed changes in either strikeout or red line so that you can see what exists now and what we're proposing?
That would be ideal for me. I don't know how everybody else's brains work, or even just the conversation that just happened now, like having that like in comment fields, within a working document, just to keep those things attached. Otherwise, I forget sometimes meeting to meeting what's been
Yeah, that
brought
makes
up.
sense.
I think what you're saying, Kim, would be they wouldn't be visible in the red line version, but only by link you could embed comments. Right? Have the comments embedded in the document that are relevant to that
Yeah.
change, so it's all in one place.
Yeah, just for us, for the committee, and then when we're
Sure.
ready to, then we know we've made
Yeah.
decisions or remember that conversation, and then we can, in the working draft, we then clean it up before we send it for anyone else to look at, but just for, because the meeting minutes won't necessarily always connect for me in the rules. Just we have a lot to take on, so the
Mhm.
more organized we can be about it, the better, I think, for our time.
So Kim, my brain probably thinks more like that, or like yours does with that type of thing. And it might get scary in a couple ways, but in past rules meetings, we would just share the rules document. I do not have a Word version of the rules document. I don't know if that exists in anyone's archives, but
I
that would
can
be a
make one
great
and
way.
send, yeah, I can make one and
Yep.
send it around as one of the things I send for our next meeting. Because
Um,
it's cut and paste for me. I can do it.
Yep.
Awesome, because the extension to that is that we can, through the way that we are meeting, if everyone has a Vermont.gov account, this is easier. Chief Hall may not, and if that's the case, we can still do it, but there might be some need to have Austin get pulled in to make sure we can navigate it to him, but we could all have everyone right in the document, and you can actually make your own comments in the
Mhm.
document. We could use track changes, which if people are familiar with track changes, it is wonderful for a review process, especially going through 3, 4, 5 iterations and say, turns out we like the first generation of the version. This one sucks. So there are technological things we can do. It is currently 2:32. We had this booked for a 1-hour meeting. I have a couple agenda items left, which I'd like to at least blow through for the sake of it. But do people have time? Is anyone under a crunch?
I'm awaiting a phone call from a lawyer that I really don't want to talk to, but I probably should. But I'm happy to blow through and let him go to voicemail and call him back.
Anybody
Yeah.
pressed for time?
I have a
And we'll-
2:30 meeting. I told them I would be 10 minutes late, so if we want to just crank through, that would be great.
Great. All right. So Rule 20, this is a fairly new addition to the list based on a hearing that the council recently had. In short, there was a rule, I believe it was Rule 18, but don't quote me on that. It's certainly in the 2018 rendition of the council rules that specify all agencies need to complete 4 hours of in-service use of force training every year with a council certified instructor. Not material to what was prosecuted or what the hearing was, that was removed from the 2025 edition of rules. And so one of the discussion points during that hearing was that a version of use of force training was delivered, whether right or wrong, whether evaluated, not to contemplate in this committee, except to say, was that an intentional deletion? As the historian of the Rules Committee, the self-appointed historian, I don't know if that was intentional or not. There was a desire by the Rules Committee to eliminate the concept of hours. If I have 4 hours of use of force training where I get nothing out of it, then is that effective? And we move to a competency-based training. So on one hand, I could say, yes, that was intentional. On the other hand, I, along with other law enforcement officers, said, wait, what? Did that change? And if I, as a member of the Rules Committee, a member of the council, and a fairly involved law enforcement officer and agency head, am surprised at that change, I suspect that either we are not clear on what the rules intended to be, or we are not communicating it out well enough. But I could also just be the dumb with his head in the sand. So fully acknowledge that as well. At the end of the day, I just wanted to call it out as, was this intentional? Do we want to have a mandatory training? Because I've been doing the 4-hour mandatory trainings with a council certified instructor, which is incredibly hard when there's not instructors available. But I also want the training. I want my agency following the standard, the statewide policy. So a discussion around that, that was one of the things that was an aha moment during that hearing. Rule 27, default judgments, also based off a professional regulation hearing, where we had to have a hearing with basically a non-responsive respondent who was convicted, imprisoned, and ultimately just didn't answer any of the notices of hearing or any of the process that a respondent to a professional regulation hearing with the council would have. He did not show up to the hearing to decide whether or not he would be decertified or not. And ultimately, a hearing was conducted that was a one-side case to decertify him. A question that was posed, why were we doing this? And it's because we don't have a rule for default judgment. As such, the contemplation of a Rule 27 default judgment was floated at some point. At some point, we had built out, the rules committee had built out some, like, we expect rules to be created for these things. LCAR, ICAR wanted us to delete those. So those don't exist right now. Whether this was a let's do this in the future idea or not, I don't remember. But at the end of the day, it seemed like a good idea, at least have a default judgment process. Which brings us, any discussion on those two items before I press to the last rule discussion?
Yes,
Joseph, I
very
agree with
quickly,
both of them.
just the use of force was an intentional removal of 4 hours, I believe. What was not removed was the requirement to do it based on the VCJC curriculum and by a VCJC certified instructor. So that was additional guidance that every agency had got from us.
Okay. That
came out before the training requirement. But to your point of the hours, it was even specific to DV. Why are we requiring an hourly requirement when we want competency-based training as opposed to mandating hours? I'll leave it at that.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up? Was there a desire to steer away from minimum requirement?
I think it was for a number of reasons. One, we were always hearing agencies complaining about time and expense that it cost them and getting somebody certified there. But we were really just trying to prove that we don't want people just to do training for a number of hours just to say that they've done it for a number of hours when that doesn't prove anything. And sometimes there are no competencies attached to that number of hour requirement. So we really wanted to focus on where everything was changing to competency based.
And then some of that was defensibility, working with IATLS, who said competency based is a more defensible model. If, for example, Officer Snuffy attends 4 hours of compliant handcuffing, but it's based on the VCJC curriculum, and then Officer Mouse, they attend 4 hours of non-compliant holds, techniques, kicks, strikes, whatever, and both are introduced into the same situation with the same training. Are they both set up for success or failure? So it just became kind of problematic when we say there's an hours-based requirement. Though hours are easy to assess, competencies are harder. So that was a big discussion. Any other questions?
Well, it would seem just on the competency issue, you're right. It would be more complex, and it would have to be reflected somehow in rule against a standard of some kind. There has to be a yardstick. Hours are easy and elementary yardstick, but there'd have to be some thought about whatever environment, this rule or otherwise, meeting a competency. What does that mean?
And I think there's a degree, and Ken probably is going to say all this. So, Ken.
No, probably not. I was going to say that I think it's actually really easy. We already have an existing platform to be able to judge competency or ascertain competency with minimum accepted practice standards for all the use of force. That could very easily be pushed out to any of the use of force instructors that are already teaching all of this materials, where they could simply go through that same checklist and ascertain whether they are still proficient or not. If there's remediation needed, so be it. Then they are able to provide that in a moment's notice. And along with that, they could also be working with MAB or the baton, the OC. There's a variety of different things they could do on top or in addition to that. So I don't think that competency portion would be difficult for agencies to be able to make happen and to retain.
Kim?
And the way we worded this during the last rule change was that we wanted the council to have the ability to have flexibility to put out to agencies what shows competency and not have to have that be a rule change all the time. So that's why the rules worded as the council approves X, Y, and Z. So it's more the council having that regular process of putting out to agencies like, here's what's required. The council has been presented this, we approve this for whether it's use of force or minimum requirements, basic training, like that's, the rules are purposefully not vague, but putting it back to the council so that we don't have
Yeah,
it strictly in rule by hour or by like a definition of competency.
sure. And I understand that. It just simply just means that that whole process has to be well documented.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and one thing that was reassuring, because this was also part of the discussion on competency-based and transitioning rules from hours to competencies. IATLS had indicated, Ken, correct me, that our curriculum generally did meet competency-based training. Ken talked about the platform that already exists. And so all of those things existed in our current existing modules. I think there's maybe maybe a handful of classes that were not mandatory per se by statute by any other means, where it's like, how do we give a competency to interacting with, I don't know, pink bunny rabbits? I'm making up a topic, but there were things where it's just like, we don't have a good way, but it's an awareness item as opposed to a technique like use of force. So we were in good shape to do that. And so that was part of the committee's ability to move to it. The other thing I wanted to say, just because of rules, take care, Kim, good to see you, and happy holidays. The other thing I wanted to say with hours-based is if Justin attends a 4-hour class that is video recorded and he is able to consume the same amount of material that I attend by watching the video recording, but I watch it at 1.5 times the speed. Have we accomplished the same training? Did we consume the same knowledge, even though I relied on technology to accomplish it at 1.5 times the speed? And so, not to say that that's necessarily, not to talk specifically to it, but we have identified with some versions of distance learning that people are finding ways to reduce time for what is fundamentally the exact same curriculum. And how do we assess that? How do we deal with the instructor who went over 3 breaks and the other one who was efficient and collapsed all the breaks into one big break that happened to be at the end of the class, and there was the big exodus from class? Like, how do we look at those things? So it starts to become a weird operational nuanced issue, but at the end of the day, most of it's common sense and everyone can see it when we talk about adult learning classrooms, 50-minute classes, 10-minute breaks, etc. Last but not least, PT test for level 1, level 2. Currently, the council by rule requires all certifications to complete a PT test for basic training. There is a entrance test committee which has made recommendations, including that the council adopt a 50 percentile on the entrance test, which is the run, 1.5 mile run, and the row. Rowing standard. So that is in effect for all level 3. There was a pause to consider the testing required for level 1, level 2. Historically speaking, level 1 fundamentally existed as a curriculum, though it exists in statute and construct. Level 2 has never done a PT test, and there's not a component within the level 2 class except for use of force tactics, which specifically require specifically requires physical fitness training beyond basic physical abilities, walking, running, climbing a set of stairs, whatever that would be. I'm not here to really define. the point was the entrance test committee, I believe, has made a request that we consider this rule. As it is currently written, it is required. It is being required for all candidates going through the level 2 or level 1-2 academy starting next month, anybody from next month forward. And so then the question is that intentional or was it not intentional? And so there's been an ask for that, and I believe a recommendation is coming from that committee on how to translate and transact that issue. So we don't really need to so much deal with it as much as to deal with whatever the recommendation is and how we feel about doing that. So those are the awareness items for all of us. We are 16 minutes over time. I do appreciate everything. Is there anything before we listen to all the public comment and adjourn?
Yes, I would just make the suggestion that prior to the next meeting, you decide 2, 3, 4 items for discussion and dig into them, and let's like start making some headway so that we don't have a document where we're jumping from one to the other. Some will take longer than others, but some will be fairly simple, but at least we'll be making continual progress, and then we just move on for, where it takes us. That's my only request.
My intent would be that we absolutely hammer the snot out of at least one every meeting. And if we can get past more than one, great. And if I'm happy to do it as we'll do 1, 2, or 3 as groups, and we just take bite sizes in that way. On the other hand, I'm happy to say here is an exhaustive list of everything we need to work on. In light of this, we are going to start on point 1. And as we work through it, we put a pin in it. We come back to our next meeting, we start picking up. So we just have a linear progression through them. I'm happy to do it either way, Director, and I'm happy to listen. My thought was just have everything out there, because when we start to see these interweave with each other, then it can sometimes raise the question of should we handle rules 11, 20, and 27 all at the same time, because they're actually talking about the same issues. I just made up 3 rules that I read off the page, but you get my point. So is there a preference?
I do, and I guess like for me, my perspective is that, we've had a rule that hasn't been enforced for years, and now it's being enforced at the first of the year, and we've got 2 different levels of percentages that folks have to pass by, and that seemed to be a concern, at least with one sheriff bringing that up for us to contemplate whether or not this should even be a rule. So where does that get? Is that at the beginning of the list because January is around the corner, or is that somewhere in the list where it is here towards the end? Like, I just want to prioritize what this list is that folks are dealing with.
My personal opinion, and everyone can disagree, the rules will not change until these make it through LCAR, ICAR, and therefore if a sheriff or if an individual wanted to change the rule or the rules, a waiver request would be necessary to be submitted in accordance with the waiver to the rules. So if there was a desire to waive the PT test for the level 2 standard, that could be introduced to, I believe, by rules, the waiver committee, but it might be the full council, to say, how do we consider this request, and is it intentional while the rules committee takes it up in parallel? I don't see us being able to transact any of these quickly and implement them without doing the emergency rulemaking process that I have no knowledge of.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating only because this is, again, we're adding time and time to a process that we've already made a decision on, but now we're going to go back and say, well, you might not like that decision, so now we can put in a waiver request. And in the meantime, what happens to that individual? Like that's my only concern. So, yep, I get all the dynamics behind it. I will sort them with however the committee wants to look at these priority wise, and we'll deal with the fallout as we do.
Director, if there is any rule or rules that you want us to fast track, I'm certainly happy to work with Attorney Burkett to figure out how we do whatever the things we need to do. And we can follow up with that afterwards if necessary. I would look to do these personally. If I were given no other direction, I would look to do all these just as one rule change through the LCAR, ICAR process. And if there's those operational issues, I do think the recommendation is to those agency heads or individuals to follow it through the waiver rule. And I'm certainly, from whatever role, happy to support that communication if you feel it's appropriate.
Okay.
Do you think there would be do you anticipate, I know we're at the very last 2 weeks of the year, in the next council meeting, I think, 5th or 6th, something like that. The first falls on a Thursday, so. Is there something that would likely or could appear on the agenda of the full council meeting in January that, a Band-Aid of sorts, if there's something that could mitigate this, there may not be, but if there is, I mean, there's an opportunity in about 3 weeks.
I guess from my perspective, just for what it's worth, we just did that at a council meeting not too long ago. And we
Yeah.
took the recommendation from the entrance test working group. They voted on it and the council voted on it. So what's the purpose of the council voting on something if another month down the road, we're gonna bring the issue
Negate
back
it,
up again?
Director-
Negate it, yeah.
Was my recollection of that meeting, that the council voted on the level 3 standard and it took no action on the level 1-2 standard?
Correct, because level one,
No.
2 didn't change. Level 1, 2 stayed at 40th and only level 3 went to 50th. That was my recollection.
Right. And then there was a request at the end, I believe by Sheriff Marcoux, for consideration on whether or not we could go back and look at the level 2 PT entrance testing process, which again, decided you could do that, but I think that's a process that we go back and look at and, have those interested parties be a part of the discussion. But, my fear is that the entrance test working group spent a lot of sweat equity going through a lot of information to come up with the information that they did and make recommendations to the council. And to that extent, until such time as that recommendation was made and voted on by the council, we have not enforced a rule that's been on the books and without any rational explanation as to why, other than it might reduce the people that want to get into the profession.
But we're not going to solve that problem now, but however I can be of service to the conversation, certainly happy to help you any way I can, Director. I know some of these rules do require feedback from other committees and or stakeholders. So I think we would want to make sure that in addition to whatever consultation you want to make with anyone you want to make it with, that we also identify what stakeholders are these. For example, if we talk about PT tests, just because we're on the topic right now, if we were talking about that, do we want to float this to the various state, county, and local police agencies, their professional associations and whatnot, to say, come to the rules meeting to talk about this? Is that too crazy to invite everybody to one of these things for the purpose of transacting the business of the rules committee? Are there other ways they can negotiate the input they want to have? So just food for thought between now and the 12th. But we probably won't prioritize anything for the 12th that requires other committees to come back, because we just don't know that we'll have their feedback. And as I suspect, they're going to delay their meetings until about the same time we're coming back in January. So at the end of the day, we'll start with the light stuff and probably the stuff that Chris Burkett has on the non-compliance, since he has that drafted. So we'll focus that. I'll just make a commitment. We're going to focus on 5A, the agency policy non-compliance, as our first topic. Also, between now and the 12th, if there are other rules as you marinate on all of this that you say, we've missed this, we had a mistake, an oversight, we've always wondered why, let me know. We can add it to the list. If the group wants to say, nope, not right now, for whatever reason, we'll cut it off. But if it's like, an aha moment. I'd rather get it on and save $2,000 in a future rules making session. But we know we're gonna have to spend the $2,000 on this one. Any members of the public, including Academy staff, that would like to make any comment? I think Kim's son left the room, so when Kim left, so we won't ask him. All right, well, allow me to be one of the first to wish you all happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, anything you celebrate. Really appreciate all the work that all of this went in, and for all of you staying an extra 26 minutes. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by someone, Colonel,
Second.
second by the chair, by acclaim. Take care, everyone. I'll probably plan a longer meeting, and if we don't need the time, we won't use it, but just don't be surprised when you see that.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
Merry
Colonel,
Christmas.
can you stay on for a minute with Chris Burkett and I?
Did you say
You
me?
didn't- Yes,
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
thank you.
For Academy staff, just a real quick question. Who should I rely on for warning meetings? Is that Lindsay, Chris, Ken?
You could,
We're-
I think I'm staff for the rules committee, so in theory, me, but if you could CC Lindsay, because she's the backstop and make sure that the wheels always run. I
Yep.
intend to put out hopefully draft minutes for this within 7 to 10 days of the next meeting. So you should get that along with the attachments of the proposed Rule 29 and other things.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. I will CC Lindsay on it. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thanks, Mark. Chris, are we done recording?
Hang on, let me turn off the recording. It's gonna take a sec.
Oh, good.